Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Call from Hell. The North Sea wind howled across the Deepwater Titan like a banshee, but Drew Campbell barely noticed. 20 years of working offshore oil rigs had made him immune to nature's tantrums. At 42, his weathered hands moved with practiced precision as he welded steel joints 300 feet above the churning waters. The physical demands kept his mind sharp and his body harder than the metal he worked with daily. Drew had started as a roughneck at 22, fresh out of the Marines, carrying ghosts from Afghanistan that the ocean winds gradually helped him bury. The isolation suited him. 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, earning enough to support his daughter Sylvia back in Texas while keeping his demons at bay. After his divorce from Christy 5 years ago, these rigs became his sanctuary. The marriage had crumbled slowly, like metal under constant stress. Christy wanted stability, a husband home every night, white picket fences. Drew needed the sea, the work that challenged him, the brotherhood of roughnecks who understood that some men were built for storms, not suburbs. The divorce was amicable enough. They both loved 12-year-old Sylvia more than they resented each other. Campbell, Jake Morrison, the rig medic, called over the wind. His usually jovial face was pale, strained. "Need you in the medical bay." Now, Drew set down his torch, studying Jake's expression. In 2 decades offshore, he'd seen men deliver news of deaths, accidents, and disasters. This look was different, personal. The medical bay felt impossibly small as Jake closed the door behind them. "Drew, I got a call from the mainland." From Sheriff Glenn Leonard in Millbrook County. Drew's blood chilled. Millbrook County, where Christy lived with Sylvia. "Your daughter is in a coma," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's at Dallas Presbyterian, been there 3 days. The injuries." He paused, swallowing hard. "Head trauma, broken ribs, internal bleeding." The world tilted. Drew gripped the examination table, his knuckles white. "What happened?" Jake's jaw tightened. "Your ex-wife's fiancé, Perry Leonard. He's the sheriff's cousin. According to the report, Sylvia fell down the stairs. The case was closed in an hour." The words hit Drew like a sledgehammer. Perry Leonard. He'd met the man once, 6 months ago, when dropping Sylvia off. Tall, soft around the middle, with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Sylvia had barely looked at Drew that day, her usual chatter replaced by nervous silence. "Fell down the stairs," Drew repeated, his voice deadly quiet. "Drew, listen to me." Jake leaned forward. "I know what you're thinking, but this guy, he's protected. Sheriff's cousin, town council member, owns half the businesses in Millbrook. Word is he's got connections all the way to the state level." Drew's mind raced, but his voice remained calm. "What exactly did the sheriff tell you?" "That Sylvia was accident-prone, always getting hurt. That you're an absentee father working dangerous jobs." He made it sound like. Jake struggled with the words. Like maybe you weren't fit to have custody anyway. The steel in Drew's spine turned molten. He'd spent years learning to control his rage in the Marines, channeling it into precision and purpose. Now that training kicked in. "When's the next chopper off this rig?" "Drew, don't do anything stupid. This isn't Afghanistan. You can't just." "When?" Jake sighed, recognizing the look in Drew's eyes. "Tomorrow morning. But the company won't like." "I'll handle the company." Drew was already moving toward the door. "Jake." "Yeah. Thanks for telling me straight." Most people would have sugarcoated it. As Drew walked back through the rig's corridors, his fellow workers stepped aside. Something in his bearing had changed, like a blade being slowly drawn from its sheath. In his cabin, he sat on his narrow bunk and stared at a photo of Sylvia, gap-toothed grin, pigtails flying as she rode her bike. Perry Leonard thought he was untouchable. Sheriff Glenn Leonard thought family connections made him invincible. They were about to learn what happened when you hurt a Marine's daughter and left him nothing to lose. Drew opened his laptop and began researching everything about Millbrook County, its power structure, and the Leonard family. He had 16 hours before the chopper arrived and 20 years of hard-won skills to plan with. The little girl in the photo deserved justice, and Drew Campbell was coming home to deliver it. Chapter 2. Homecoming and Reconnaissance. The helicopter touched down at Houston Regional Airport under a gray October sky. Drew Campbell stepped off carrying a single duffel bag and 20 years of offshore savings in his bank account. His first stop was Dallas Presbyterian Hospital, where sterile white corridors led him to the ICU. Sylvia lay impossibly small in the hospital bed, machines beeping around her like electronic prayers. Her face was a landscape of bruises, purple around her left eye, a cut on her lip that had required stitches. Drew stood in the doorway, his hands trembling for the first time since Afghanistan. "She's been unconscious for 4 days," a voice said behind him. Drew turned to see Dr. Patricia Giles, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair. "I'm her attending physician. You must be her father. How bad is it?" Dr. Giles consulted her chart. "Traumatic brain injury, 3 broken ribs, a lacerated spleen. We managed to repair. The head injury is our primary concern. There's swelling we're monitoring closely." Drew studied his daughter's medical chart over the doctor's shoulder, his engineering mind cataloging every detail. "These injuries, they're not consistent with falling downstairs." Dr. Giles met his eyes directly. "No, they're not. But I'm not a detective, Mr. Campbell. I just fix what's broken. What aren't you telling me?" The doctor glanced around, then lowered her voice. "This is the 3rd time Sylvia's been here in 6 months. Broken arm in July, fell off her bike. Concussion in August, walked into a door. I filed reports with Child Protective Services each time. And caseworker was reassigned. New one said there wasn't enough evidence. Funny thing about small towns, evidence has a way of disappearing when the right people don't want it found." Drew absorbed this information like tactical intelligence. "Where's her mother?" "Haven't seen Christy since the first day. Perry Leonard's been here, though, asking about Sylvia's condition, wanting to know when she might wake up. The predator checking on his prey." Drew filed that detail away with the others. After spending 2 hours with Sylvia, Drew drove his rental car toward Millbrook County. The town sat 90 miles southeast of Dallas, population 8,400, surrounded by cattle ranches and oil fields. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and family names carried weight across generations. Drew checked into the Millbrook Motor Lodge, a tired establishment that had seen better decades. The desk clerk, a weathered man named Carl Collier, sized him up with curious eyes. "You're Sylvia Campbell's daddy," Carl said. It wasn't a question. Word travels fast. "Small town. Heard about her accident. Real shame." Carl's tone suggested he knew more than he was saying. "You know Perry Leonard?" Carl's expression shuddered. "Everyone knows Perry. Owns the biggest auto dealership in 3 counties. Sits on the town council. Good man from a good family." The practiced response told Drew everything. Fear masquerading as respect. Drew spent the evening driving through Millbrook, mapping the town like a patrol route. Leonard Motors dominated Main Street, a sprawling complex of showrooms and service bays. Perry's house sat on Elm Street, a large colonial with expensive cars in the driveway. The sheriff's station was a modest brick building that shared a parking lot with the courthouse. At Mabel's Diner, Drew nursed coffee and listened to local conversations. The waitress, a tired woman named Betty Dillon, was more talkative than the motel clerk. "You're asking about the Leonards? Honey, that family's run this town since my granddaddy's time. Old Glenn's been sheriff for 15 years. His daddy was sheriff before him. Perry's the golden boy, football star in high school, full scholarship to A&M, came back to take over his daddy's business." "Sounds like a success story." Betty glanced around nervously before leaning closer. "Success, maybe, but there's been whispers about Perry since he was in high school. Girls who wouldn't go out with him twice, if you know what I mean. Course, ain't nobody gonna say nothing official. Not in this town." Drew left the diner with a clearer picture. The Leonard family operated Millbrook like a feudal kingdom, with Perry as the entitled prince who took what he wanted. The town's power structure protected him, and anyone who challenged that system found themselves on the wrong side of both law and commerce. Back at the motel, Drew opened his laptop and began building detailed profiles. Sheriff Glenn Leonard, 58, elected unopposed for 3 consecutive terms. Perry Leonard, 35, Inherited Leonard Motors at 28 when his father died in a hunting accident. Town council records showed Perry's fingers in numerous local businesses, construction, real estate, even the hospital board. Drew cross-referenced property records, business licenses, and court filings. What emerged was a picture of systematic intimidation and control. Families who crossed the Leonards found themselves facing tax audits, health inspections, and sudden difficulties with permits and licenses. But every system had weaknesses. Every king had enemies. Drew just needed to find them. His phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Giles. Sylvia's vitals improving. Might wake up soon. Thought you want to know. Drew stared out the motel window at Millbrook's quiet streets. Tomorrow, he would begin the process of dismantling Perry Leonard's perfect life. Tonight, he planned every move like the military operation it was about to become. Chapter 3. Building the Foundation. Drew woke before dawn, a habit ingrained by decades of rig work and military service. His first call was to Dr. Giles, who reported Sylvia's condition remained stable but unchanged. His second call was to his former Marine buddy, Angel Payne, now running a private security firm in Houston. Drew Campbell, you son of a bitch, Angel's voice crackled through the phone. Thought you were married to that oil rig. Need a favor, Angel. Big one. Name it. Drew explained the situation in military terms. Target assessment, local power structure, need for intelligence gathering. Angel listened without interruption, his silence speaking volumes. Does Perry Leonard have any skeletons we should know about? That's what I need to find out. Can you run a deep background? Financial records, criminal history, anything that doesn't show up in public records. Give me 48 hours. What else you need? Clean phones, surveillance equipment, and someone who knows how to make evidence disappear if things go sideways. Drew. Angel's tone grew serious. You sure about this road you're walking down? My daughter's in a coma because some piece of shit thinks he's untouchable. Yeah, I'm sure. Roger that. I'll be in touch. Drew's next stop was the Millbrook Public Library, where he spent 3 hours combing through local newspaper archives. The librarian, a sharp-eyed woman named Janine Robertson, proved unexpectedly helpful. You're researching the Leonard family? She asked, noticing his focus. Local history project, Drew lied smoothly. Janine glanced around the empty library before sitting beside him. Honey, I've been watching this town for 30 years. You want real history, not the sanitized version in these papers. Drew studied her carefully. Mid-50s, intelligent eyes, the bearing of someone who'd seen enough to be dangerous. What kind of real history? The kind that explains why 3 different families left town suddenly after their daughters accused Perry Leonard of things that somehow never made it to trial. The kind that explains why the hospital got a new board of directors right after Dr. Martinez started asking uncomfortable questions about Perry's recreational activities. Drew felt pieces clicking into place. What happened to Dr. Martinez? Transferred to Dallas. Said he got a better offer, but his wife told my sister he was basically run out of town. Too many questions about injuries that didn't match the official stories. How many stories like this are there? Janine looked around again, then pulled out a sheet of paper. I keep track. Call it professional curiosity. These are families that left Millbrook in the past 5 years, all after having some kind of conflict with the Leonard family or their businesses. Drew studied the list. 15 families, representing over 40 people who'd simply abandoned their lives in Millbrook. The pattern was clear: challenge the Leonards, face systematic destruction of your livelihood and safety. Why haven't you done anything about this? With what? Suspicions? Stories? Glenn Leonard is the law here, and Perry's got enough lawyers to bury anyone who speaks up. Plus, he's smart. Never leaves clear evidence. Always has plausible explanations. Drew memorized the names on Janine's list. These families, any of them still in Texas? Most moved out of state. But the Maldonado family, they own a ranch about 20 miles north. Jared Maldonado's been fighting Perry in court for 2 years over water rights. Perry wants to expand his dealership, needs Jared's land. They still here, for now, but their cattle have been getting sick lately. Mysterious illnesses that always seem to affect the herds right before important court dates. Drew left the library with a new understanding of Perry Leonard's methods. The man wasn't just a violent predator. He was a sophisticated sociopath who'd weaponized an entire town's power structure. But sophistication meant complexity, and complexity meant vulnerabilities. He drove to the Maldonado Ranch, where he found Jared Maldonado repairing fence in the October heat. A man in his 40s with calloused hands and suspicious eyes. Jared listened as Drew introduced himself and explained his interest in Perry Leonard. "You're Sylvia's daddy," Jared said, setting down his tools. "Heard about what happened. Sorry. I'm told you've had your own problems with Perry." Jared spat in the dust. "That bastard's been trying to steal my land for 2 years. Offers way below market value. Then when I refuse, suddenly I've got problems. Health inspectors, tax audits, cattle getting sick right before I need to sell." "Sick how?" "Poisoned. Vet says it's consistent with deliberate contamination, but can't prove it. Perry's cousin Timothy works for the county agricultural department. Funny how these inspections always happen right after Timothy's been out here checking compliance." Drew filed this information away. "Anyone else fighting back?" "Fighting back?" Jared laughed bitterly. "Mister, this is their town. You fight back, you lose everything. Look what happened to your little girl. What if someone could level the playing field?" Jared studied Drew's face, reading something in his expression. "You're not talking about lawyers and courts, are you?" "I'm talking about justice. The kind that works when the system's broken." "What would you need?" "Information. Access. People who know where Perry keeps his secrets." Jared was quiet for a long moment, then nodded toward the house. "Come inside. My wife makes good coffee, and we got some talking to do." As the sun set over Millbrook County, Drew Campbell began assembling the pieces of his war against the Leonard family. It wouldn't be fought in courtrooms or with official channels. It would be fought in shadows, using skills learned in darker places, with stakes measured in more than money or land. Tomorrow, he would begin turning Perry Leonard's perfect life into his personal hell. Chapter 4. Gathering Intelligence. Angel Payne arrived in Millbrook at midnight, driving a nondescript van loaded with surveillance equipment. Drew met him at an abandoned gas station on the town's outskirts, their reunion brief and professional. "Your boy Perry's got interesting finances," Angel said, handing Drew a thick file. 3 bank accounts, 2 in the Caymans. Income doesn't match his lifestyle. That house cost $800,000, but his dealership barely breaks even. Drew studied the financial records. Money laundering? Looks like it. Cross-referencing with DEA databases shows several of his business associates have drug connections. Nothing proven, but patterns suggest he's washing money through the dealership. What about the drug connections? Angel's expression darkened. This is where it gets interesting. Perry's been buying properties along rural roads, abandoned houses, empty lots. Perfect for distribution networks. DEA's been watching the area, but someone's been feeding information to the dealers. Every raid comes up empty. Drew connected the dots. Inside information from law enforcement. Sheriff Glenn Leonard's been remarkably unsuccessful at catching drug dealers for a county that's supposed to be a major trafficking route. They spent 2 hours installing surveillance equipment around Perry's house and the sheriff's station. Micro cameras, audio pickups, GPS trackers for vehicles. By dawn, they had comprehensive coverage of the Leonard family's movements. Drew's phone rang as they finished. Dr. Giles calling from the hospital. "Sylvia's awake," she said. Confused and scared, but awake. "She's asking for you." Drew drove to Dallas at speeds that would have impressed his Marine convoy drivers. He found Sylvia propped up in bed, looking impossibly fragile but beautifully alive. Her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Daddy." "Hey, sweetheart." Drew sat beside her bed, taking her small hand in his. "How are you feeling?" "My head hurts, and I can't remember." She frowned, touching the bandage on her forehead. "Dr. Giles says I hit my head." Drew chose his words carefully. "You've been hurt, baby, but you're going to be okay." "Where's Mommy?" The question cut deep. "She'll be here soon." Sylvia's expression changed, fear flickering across her features. "Is Perry coming too?" Drew felt his blood pressure spike. "Do you remember Perry?" Sylvia struggled with the words. "He gets mad sometimes. When Mommy's not home." He says things that scare me. What kind of things? That little girls need to learn respect. That I'm too mouthy like mommy was. Tears started flowing. Daddy, I didn't fall down the stairs. He pushed me because I spilled juice on his newspaper. Drew's vision went red at the edges. He forced himself to stay calm, to be the father Sylvia needed. Sweetheart, Perry's never going to hurt you again. I promise. How can you promise that? Because Daddy fixes things. It's what I do. Dr. Giles appeared in the doorway, her expression grave. Mr. Campbell, could I speak with you outside? In the hallway, she lowered her voice. Sylvia's memory is returning, which is good. But there's something else. When we were treating her injuries, we found evidence of... She paused, choosing words carefully. Older trauma. Healed fractures, scar tissue consistent with repeated abuse. Drew's hands clenched into fists. How long? Based on healing patterns, at least 6 months. Maybe longer. Have you documented this? Everything's in her medical record. Which means if Child Protective Services does their job, they won't. Not in Millbrook County. Dr. Giles nodded grimly. Then what are you planning to do? Drew met her eyes. Whatever it takes. That evening, Drew returned to Millbrook with Sylvia's testimony burning in his memory. Angel had been busy. Surveillance feeds showed Perry's daily routine, his meetings with questionable associates, his late-night visits to properties along trafficking routes. At the Maldonado Ranch, Jared introduced Drew to 2 other families fighting the Leonard machine. The Durhams had lost their farm to suspicious bank foreclosures. The Mahoneys watched their trucking business destroyed by endless regulatory problems after refusing to haul questionable cargo for Perry's associates. There's more of us than you might think, Jared explained. But we're scattered, scared, broke. Perry's good at isolating his enemies. What if you weren't scattered anymore? Drew asked. What do you mean? Drew spread surveillance photos across Jared's kitchen table. Perry Leonard thinks he's untouchable because he controls information and official channels. But what if those channels worked against him? The group studied the photos. Perry meeting with known drug dealers, loading suspiciously heavy boxes into vehicles, accepting cash payments for cars that were never actually sold. This is evidence, said Manuel Durham. Real evidence. Evidence the local sheriff will bury, Angel pointed out. But state and federal agencies, that's different. Drew's plan was taking shape. Perry's operation depends on corruption, staying local. But if we can force investigation from outside agencies, coordinate it with public pressure and economic warfare. You're talking about destroying his entire life, Jared said. He destroyed my daughter's life. Fair trade. Over the next 4 hours, they mapped out Perry's vulnerabilities. Financial crimes that would interest the IRS and DEA. Civil rights violations that would bring federal attention. Business practices that violated state regulations. But most importantly, they identified Perry's psychological weaknesses. His need for control, his belief in his own invincibility, his tendency to escalate when challenged. The key is making him angry, Drew explained. Angry people make mistakes. And when Perry Leonard makes mistakes, he won't have his cousin's protection to save him. As the meeting broke up, Angel pulled Drew aside. You know, this isn't just about justice anymore, right? This is personal. Make sure you can live with whatever you're planning. Drew thought about Sylvia's broken body in that hospital bed, her fear when she mentioned Perry's name. I can live with it, he said. Question is whether Perry Leonard will be able to. The war was about to begin. Chapter 5, Opening Moves. Drew's first strike came at dawn. While Perry Leonard slept in his expensive house, teams of federal agents surrounded Leonard Motors. The DEA raid was based on an anonymous tip backed by financial records Angel had discovered, showing suspicious cash transactions. Though Perry wasn't arrested, agents seized his computers and financial records. Drew watched from across the street as Perry arrived to find his business crawling with federal agents. The man's face went through a spectrum of emotions, confusion, anger, then the cold calculation of someone used to controlling situations. Sheriff Glenn Leonard arrived within minutes, but federal jurisdiction meant he could only watch as his cousin's empire came under scrutiny. Drew captured it all on camera, noting how Glenn's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon before he controlled himself. "That's just round one," Angel said through Drew's earpiece. "IRS is hitting his personal accounts this afternoon." Drew moved to his second position. At the county courthouse, he filed civil suits against both Perry and Glenn Leonard. Wrongful injury for Sylvia. Civil rights violations for systematic abuse of power. Public corruption charges that would force discovery of financial records. The court clerk, a nervous woman named Misty Moore, processed the papers with shaking hands. "Sir, I have to ask, are you sure about this?" "The Leonards, they don't take challenges well." "Neither do Marines," Drew replied. By noon, local news crews had picked up the story. Drew's military background, combined with Sylvia's condition and the federal raids, created a narrative that resonated beyond Millbrook County. Camera crews gathered outside Leonard Motors, the sheriff's station, and the hospital where Sylvia was recovering. Perry's first mistake came at 2 p.m. Furious and desperate to regain control, he held an impromptu press conference outside his dealership. This is a witch hunt by a disgruntled ex-husband who can't accept that his daughter's accident was just that, an accident, Perry declared. "I've been nothing but supportive of Christy Campbell and her daughter. This man is using his child's tragedy to attack upstanding members of this community." Drew watched the press conference live, noting Perry's tells. The way his left eye twitched when he lied, how his voice rose when he felt challenged. More importantly, Perry had just publicly claimed innocence regarding Sylvia's accident, creating a legal record that could be used against him. "He's rattled," Angel observed. "Look at his hands." Perry's hands were trembling slightly, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. The first crack in his armor of invincibility. Drew's phone buzzed with a call from Jared Maldonado. "Drew, you need to see this." At the ranch, Jared showed Drew security footage from the night before. A pickup truck had driven slowly past the property 3 times, clearly conducting surveillance. "That's Perry's truck," Jared said. Timothy Leonard was driving. "He's escalating," Drew realized. "Feeling pressure, so he's reverting to intimidation tactics." "What do? We give him something bigger to worry about." Drew's next move targeted Perry's psychological pressure points. Using information from Janine Robertson's files, he reached out to families that had been driven from Millbrook. 3 agreed to return for depositions, providing sworn testimony about the Leonard family's pattern of abuse and intimidation. The stories painted a picture of systematic terror. Business owners forced to sell at below-market prices. Families facing mysterious health problems until they left town. Young women who'd been pressured into silence about Perry's aggressive behavior. Drew released these depositions to news outlets, creating a media storm that reached Dallas and Houston. National news picked up the story. Small-town corruption exposed after child abuse case. Perry's second mistake came that evening. Cornered by reporters outside his house, he lost his temper entirely. "These people are liars and cowards," he shouted. "They left town because they couldn't make it here. Now they're making up stories for money." Drew Campbell is a deadbeat father who abandoned his family for oil rigs. His daughter got hurt because no one was watching her. The outburst was pure gold. Perry had just accused abuse victims of lying for money while simultaneously victim-blaming a 12-year-old girl. The video went viral within hours. At the hospital, Drew found Sylvia watching the news coverage with Dr. Giles. "Daddy, why is that man saying mean things about you?" Sylvia asked. "Because scared people say stupid things, sweetheart." "Is he scared of you?" Drew considered the question seriously. "Yeah, baby. I think he is." Dr. Giles pulled Drew aside. "There's something you should know. Perry called here this morning, asking about Sylvia's visiting hours. When I told him she wasn't accepting visitors, he got very angry. Security had to escort him out. He came here, demanded to see her, said he was family, and had a right to check on her condition. It was disturbing." Drew felt the cold rage that had sustained him through combat missions. Perry wasn't just a predator. He was obsessed with maintaining control over his victims. "Double security on Sylvia's room," Drew instructed. "No one gets near her without my approval." That night, Drew reviewed surveillance footage from around Perry's house. The man was pacing, making agitated phone calls, clearly spiraling as his perfect life crumbled. Glenn Leonard visited twice, their conversations growing increasingly heated. "They're fracturing," Angel reported. "Glenn knows Perry's a liability now, but family loyalty's keeping him in the game. How long before one of them breaks? Perry's closer than his cousin. Sheriff's got more to lose, more self-control. But Perry, he's used to getting his way. This level of public scrutiny is new for him." Drew nodded, studying Perry's body language on the surveillance feeds. The man was a predator whose hunting ground had been invaded. Soon, he would make the kind of mistake that ended games permanently. The war was escalating exactly as Drew had planned. Chapter 6, Pressure Points. Sheriff Glenn Leonard arrived at Drew's motel room at 3 a.m., accompanied by 2 deputies. Drew was awake, watching surveillance feeds on his laptop. He opened the door wearing jeans and a t-shirt that showed the kind of muscle definition that came from decades of hard labor. "Mr. Campbell," Glenn said, his tone professionally neutral. "Need to talk to you about some harassment complaints." "At 3 in the morning? Small town. We keep irregular hours." Glenn's eyes flicked to the laptop screen, noting the multiple camera feeds. "Mind if we come in?" "Actually, I do. You got a warrant." Glenn's jaw tightened. "Don't need one for a friendly conversation." "Then we can have it right here." Drew stepped outside, closing the door behind him. The deputies flanked him, hands resting near their weapons. "Perry Leonard says you've been stalking him, taking pictures, harassing his employees." Drew smiled coldly. "Perry Leonard says a lot of things. Most of them lies." "You need to understand something," Glenn said, stepping closer. "This is my county. I've been keeping peace here for 15 years. Whatever problems you have with Perry, there are proper channels. Like the proper channels that closed my daughter's case in an hour." Glenn's mask slipped slightly. "Your daughter had an accident. Tragic, but accidents happen." "Funny thing about accidents," Drew said conversationally. "In the Marines, we learned to distinguish between accidents and patterns. Your cousin has an interesting pattern around young girls." "That's enough." Glenn's hand moved to his gun. "You're walking a thin line here." "Am I?" Drew's voice remained calm, but his posture shifted subtly, weight balanced, hands loose. 20 years of combat training made itself known. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you're threatening a victim's father on behalf of his abuser." The 2 deputies exchanged glances, suddenly aware they were dealing with someone far more dangerous than the grieving father they'd expected. Glenn stepped back. "This conversation's over." "But Mr. Campbell, accidents can happen to anyone, even Marines." As the patrol cars drove away, Drew activated his recording equipment. The entire conversation had been captured in high definition, including Glenn's barely veiled threats. Angel emerged from the shadows near the motel. "Subtle as a brick, that one. They're getting desperate." "Good. What's next?" Drew checked his watch. Perry's morning routine. He stops at Mabel's diner every Tuesday for coffee. Time for a public conversation. At 8 a.m., Drew walked into Mabel's diner and sat at the counter. The breakfast crowd included several local businessmen, perfect witnesses for what was about to unfold. Perry arrived 10 minutes later, stopping dead when he saw Drew. Well, Perry said loudly. "If it isn't Millbrook's newest celebrity." Drew didn't turn around. "Morning, Perry. You know, I feel sorry for you," Perry continued, his voice carrying across the diner. "Must be hard, knowing your daughter got hurt because you weren't around to protect her." The diner went quiet. Everyone understood they were witnessing something significant. Drew slowly turned on his stool. "Funny you should mention protection. Been thinking a lot about that lately." "Have you now?" "Yeah, thinking about how real men protect children instead of hurting them." Perry's face flushed. "I don't know what you're implying, but I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. You put my daughter in a coma because she spilled juice on your newspaper. That's a lie." Drew stood, his presence suddenly filling the small diner. "Is it? Because Sylvia remembers. She remembers you pushing her down those stairs. She remembers you telling her that little girls need to learn respect." "You can't prove anything," Perry snarled, then immediately looked like he regretted the words. "Can I?" Drew pulled out his phone, showing the screen to the diner's patrons. Because the FBI is very interested in your financial records. The DEA wants to know about your late-night meetings with known drug dealers. And Child Protective Services just reopened their investigation into Sylvia's previous injuries. Perry's confidence cracked visibly. You're bluffing. Am I? Check the news at noon. You'll see the federal seizure notices for your offshore accounts. This was a bluff. The federal seizures were still pending, but Perry didn't know that. His face went pale, then red with rage. You son of a bitch, he whispered. You have no idea what you're messing with. Enlighten me. Perry stepped closer, lowering his voice. I own this town. I own the sheriff, the mayor, half the business owners. You're one man with a grudge. You can't win. Drew smiled, and several diner patrons later said it was the coldest expression they'd ever seen. Perry, I've been in places where people tried to kill me every day for months at a time. You think a small-town bully scares me? Maybe I should scare you. Perry's hand moved inside his jacket. Drew's training kicked in. His hand shot out, grasping Perry's wrist with crushing force. I wouldn't if I were you. The silence in the diner was absolute. Perry's face went white as Drew's grip tightened. Here's what's going to happen, Drew said quietly. You're going to walk out of here. You're going to go home. And you're going to think very carefully about your next move. Because every threat you make, every intimidation tactic you try, just gives me more ammunition. Drew released Perry's wrist. The man stumbled backward, cradling his hand. This isn't over, Perry said. No, Drew agreed. It's not. After Perry left, the diner erupted in whispered conversations. Betty Dillon approached Drew with fresh coffee. Honey, you just painted a target on your back. Target was already there, Drew replied. Now everyone knows it. Within hours, video of the confrontation was circulating online. Perry's threat, Drew's calm response, the visible intimidation attempt. It all painted Perry as exactly what he was, a bully who crumbled when faced with real opposition. But Drew knew Perry's next move would be more desperate, more dangerous. Cornered predators were at their most lethal. That evening, surveillance showed Perry meeting with 3 men Drew didn't recognize. Hard-faced individuals who carried themselves like ex-convicts. Glenn Leonard wasn't present. The sheriff was either cutting ties or maintaining plausible deniability. He's hiring muscle, Angel observed. This is about to get physical. Drew checked his weapons. A Glock 19 concealed under his shirt, a tactical knife in his boot. Legal in Texas and necessary given the escalation. Let him come, Drew said. I've been waiting for this fight my whole life. Chapter 7. The Trap Springs. The attack came at midnight. 3 men approached Drew's motel room from different angles, moving with the practiced coordination of experienced criminals. They expected to find a sleeping oil rig worker. Instead, they found an empty room rigged with motion sensors and cameras. Drew watched from his real position, the motel's maintenance shed, as the intruders discovered their mistake. The lead man, a scarred individual Angel had identified as Carl Blade Collier, cousin to the motel clerk, spoke into a radio. He's not here. Place is wired for surveillance. Perry Leonard's voice crackled back. Find him. Now. Drew smiled in the darkness. Perry had just implicated himself in conspiracy to commit assault, possibly murder. Every word was being recorded. Angel's voice whispered through Drew's earpiece. 2 more vehicles approaching. Looks like Perry's bringing the whole crew. Drew moved to his secondary position, the abandoned gas station where this war had begun. From there, he could monitor all approaches to Millbrook while staying mobile. Perry's convoy arrived at the motel like a pack of hunting wolves. 6 men total, armed and clearly prepared for violence. Perry himself stayed in his truck, directing operations by radio. Burn it down, Perry ordered. Make it look like an electrical fire. Drew activated his emergency beacon. Within minutes, sirens wailed across Millbrook as fire trucks and ambulances responded to reports of an explosion at the motel. The arsonists fled, but not before traffic cameras captured their license plates. By dawn, the story had exploded across Texas media. Local businessman attempts to murder military veteran father of abuse victim. The federal investigators who've been building cases against Perry suddenly had attempted murder and arson to add to their charges. Sheriff Glenn Leonard held a press conference at 8 a.m., his face haggard with exhaustion and stress. Last night's incident is under investigation. We have no evidence linking Perry Leonard to. He was interrupted by reporters shouting questions about the recorded radio communications, the identified license plates, the federal warrants that had been issued an hour earlier. Glenn's world crumbled in real time, broadcast live across the state. By 9 a.m., Texas Rangers had taken control of the sheriff's station. Glenn Leonard was under arrest for conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Drew found Perry at Leonard Motors, frantically trying to destroy documents while federal agents waited outside with search warrants. Through the window, Drew could see the man's desperation, 20 years of crime and corruption about to be exposed. Drew's phone rang. It was Christy, Sylvia's mother, calling from the hospital. Drew? I saw the news. Is it true? About Perry? Every word of it. There was a long pause, then crying. I'm so sorry. I should have protected her. I should have seen. He fooled a lot of people, Christy. That's what predators do. Sylvia's been asking for you. She's scared, confused about why Perry was on TV being arrested. I'll be there in 2 hours. Drew found his daughter sitting up in bed, watching news coverage with Dr. Giles. She looked small and vulnerable, but her eyes held new understanding. Daddy, did Perry really try to hurt you too? Drew sat beside her bed, choosing his words carefully. Perry's a bad man who hurt people because he thought no one could stop him. But you stopped him. We stopped him. All of us together. What happens now? Dr. Giles answered. Perry Leonard's been arrested on multiple federal charges. Sheriff Leonard, too. There's going to be a trial, and you might have to tell people what happened to you. Sylvia nodded gravely. Will you be there with me, Daddy? Every step of the way. Drew's phone buzzed with a call from Angel. You need to see this. The surveillance footage showed Perry's final mistake. Desperate and abandoned by his allies, he'd attempted to flee Millbrook with a truck full of incriminating documents and drug money. Texas Rangers had arrested him at a roadblock, finding enough evidence to put him away for life. But the most satisfying moment came from the holding cell cameras. Perry Leonard, stripped of his power and protection, was just another prisoner awaiting trial. The man who'd built his life on intimidating the vulnerable now faced his own vulnerability. Drew watched as federal agents led Perry through the courthouse in handcuffs. The crowd that gathered wasn't supportive. These were people Perry had terrorized for years, finally free to show their contempt. Among them stood Jared Maldonado, Manuel Durham, and dozens of others. Families that had been scattered by Perry's reign of terror were returning to reclaim their town. Justice, Angel said, standing beside Drew. Feels good, doesn't it? Drew thought about Sylvia's broken body, her fear, the systematic abuse that had gone unchallenged for years. It's a start, he replied. Chapter 8, Unraveling the Web. The federal investigation into Perry Leonard's criminal empire revealed a scope that shocked even Drew. What began as a case of child abuse had exposed a network spanning 3 counties, involving drug trafficking, money laundering, human trafficking, and systematic corruption reaching into state government. Drew sat in the FBI field office in Dallas, reviewing evidence with Agent Gabriel Manning, the lead investigator on the case. Your daughter's case was the key that unlocked everything, Manning explained. Perry's mistake was thinking local corruption could protect him from federal jurisdiction. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showing millions in laundered drug money. Surveillance footage of Perry coordinating with known cartel associates. Testimony from dozens of victims who'd been too terrified to speak before. What's his exposure? Drew asked. Federal RICO charges, drug conspiracy, money laundering, attempted murder, and about 30 counts of civil rights violations. He's looking at life without parole. And Glenn Leonard? 25 to 30 years. The corruption charges alone will end his career and pension. Drew studied photographs of the Leonard family's assets being seized. The house on Elm Street, Leonard Motors, investment properties, all forfeited under federal asset forfeiture laws. The family that had ruled Millbrook for 3 generations was being systematically dismantled. But the most satisfying development came from an unexpected source. Timothy Leonard, The cousin who'd worked for the agricultural department had turned state's evidence in exchange for reduced charges. His testimony revealed the full extent of the family's intimidation tactics, including the systematic poisoning of livestock and crops belonging to families who resisted their demands. "Tim's giving us everything," Manning continued. "Names, dates, methods." Turns out the Leonards kept detailed records of their criminal activities, thinking local protection made them untouchable. Drew's phone rang. It was Dr. Giles calling with the news he'd been waiting for. "Sylvia's being discharged tomorrow. Full recovery, no lasting neurological damage. It's remarkable, really. She's tougher than she looks. She gets that from her mother," Drew lied. In truth, Sylvia had inherited her father's steel spine, his refusal to break under pressure. At the hospital, Drew found Sylvia packing her belongings with excited energy. Christy sat nearby, looking healthier than she had in months. The stress lines around her eyes had faded, replaced by something resembling peace. "Daddy, Dr. Giles says I can go home tomorrow." "That's right, sweetheart. Where do you want to go home to?" It was a loaded question. The house in Millbrook held traumatic memories. Christie's engagement to Perry was obviously ended. The family structure that had existed before was gone. "Can we live together again?" Sylvia asked with the direct honesty of a 12-year-old. "All three of us." Drew and Christy exchanged glances. Their marriage had ended for good reasons that hadn't changed. But their daughter's near-death experience had shifted priorities for both of them. "Let's take it one day at a time," Christy said carefully. "Maybe we can find a new house. Somewhere fresh, without bad memories." "In Millbrook?" Sylvia asked. "If that's where you want to be." Drew understood the subtext. Millbrook was healing, but it would take time. The Leonard family's removal had created a power vacuum that decent people were slowly filling. Families were returning, businesses were reopening under new management, and the culture of fear was gradually being replaced by something healthier. Jared Maldonado had been elected interim sheriff, running unopposed on a platform of transparency and accountability. The town council had been restructured, with several Leonard associates facing criminal charges. Millbrook was becoming the kind of place where children could grow up safely. That evening, Drew met with Angel at a Dallas restaurant to debrief the operation. "So what's next?" Angel asked. "Back to the oil rigs." Drew considered the question. The offshore life had sustained him for 20 years, but nearly losing Sylvia had changed his perspective. She needed stability, protection, a father who was present rather than absent. "I'm thinking about staying in Texas. Maybe starting a security business. Lots of small towns have corruption problems they can't handle alone." Angel raised his beer. "To fighting the good fight." "To family," Drew corrected. As they drank, Drew reflected on the path that had brought him here. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a man who lived for the isolation of the sea. Now he was a father who'd chosen his daughter over everything else. Perry Leonard had been right about one thing. Drew Campbell was dangerous. But the danger wasn't to innocent people. It was to predators who thought vulnerability meant weakness, who believed power meant immunity from consequences. The phone call from the North Sea had changed everything. But it had also revealed who Drew really was beneath the oil-stained coveralls and offshore isolation. He was a man who protected his family, no matter the cost. Tomorrow, he would take his daughter home, not to the life they had before, but to something new and better, something worth fighting for. Chapter 9, New Foundations. 6 months later, Drew stood in the courtroom as Judge Catherine LeBlanc read Perry Leonard's sentence. Life imprisonment without possibility of parole on federal RICO charges, plus consecutive sentences for drug trafficking, money laundering, and attempted murder. The man who had once ruled Millbrook County through fear would die in federal prison. Perry's final moment of defiance came as deputies led him away in shackles. He turned to look directly at Drew, his eyes promising that somehow, someday, there would be consequences. Drew met his gaze without flinching. Some promises weren't worth keeping. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered around Drew and Sylvia. His daughter handled the attention with remarkable poise for a 13-year-old, her recovery complete in every way that mattered. "How does it feel to know Perry Leonard will never hurt anyone again?" a reporter asked. "It feels like justice," Sylvia replied. But mostly it feels like we can move on now. Drew had prepared her for these questions, teaching her that strength wasn't about revenge. It was about healing and moving forward. She learned the lesson better than many adults. The Campbell family had indeed moved forward in ways Drew hadn't expected. He and Christy hadn't remarried, but they'd bought houses on the same street in Millbrook's restored downtown. Close enough for Sylvia to feel secure, distant enough to maintain healthy boundaries. Drew's security consulting business had grown beyond his expectations. Towns across Texas called when they faced corruption or intimidation they couldn't handle through official channels. He'd assembled a team of former military and law enforcement professionals who specialized in situations where the system had failed. Angel Payne had moved his company to Texas, establishing a partnership that combined Drew's investigative skills with high-tech surveillance capabilities. Together, they'd helped expose corruption in 7 counties, always working within the law, but using creative interpretations of what that meant. Campbell Security Solutions, their advertisements read, "When a system fails, we don't." The irony wasn't lost on Drew that his attempt to save his daughter had revealed his true calling. He'd spent 20 years running from conflict, finding peace in isolation. Now he'd found peace in fighting for justice. Sylvia had started high school in Millbrook, where she was known as the girl who'd brought down the Leonard crime family. Instead of making her a target, it made her a symbol of resistance to bullying and abuse. She'd started a peer counseling program for abuse victims, showing the same courage her father demonstrated in darker arenas. On a warm October evening, exactly 1 year after that phone call on the oil rig, Drew sat on his porch watching Sylvia practice soccer with friends. Christy joined him, carrying 2 beers and wearing the relaxed expression of someone whose nightmares had finally ended. "Any regrets?" she asked. Drew considered the question seriously. His old life was gone. The solitude, the simplicity, the ability to disappear and to work for weeks at a time. In its place was complexity, responsibility, and constant awareness that people depended on him. "None," he said finally. "Even about the violence? Angel told me some of what you've had to do in other cases." Drew's work often required methods that existed in legal gray areas. Surveillance that bordered on stalking. Psychological pressure that some might call harassment. Investigations that sometimes ended with evidence appearing in prosecutors' offices through unofficial channels. "Bad people do bad things because they think good people won't stop them," Drew said. "Sometimes the only way to stop them is to be scarier than they are." That's a dangerous line to walk. Yeah, but someone has to walk it. A car pulled up, Angel arriving for their weekly strategy meeting. He carried a file folder and wore the expression that meant business. "New case?" Christy asked. "Small town near Austin," Angel confirmed. "Police chief's been covering up sexual assaults by his nephew. Families getting the runaround from state authorities." Drew studied the file's contents. Another family in crisis, another system failure, another opportunity to prove that justice didn't always wear a badge. "When do we start?" he asked. As the sun set over Millbrook, Drew reflected on the path that had brought him here. A year ago, he'd been a man hiding from the world on an oil rig. Now he was someone who ran toward danger when innocent people needed protection. The phone call from the North Sea had changed everything. It had forced him to choose between safety and family, between isolation and responsibility. The choice had cost him his old life, but given him something infinitely more valuable: purpose. Perry Leonard had been wrong about one crucial thing. Drew Campbell wasn't just one man with a grudge. He was a father who discovered that some fights were worth everything, and that sometimes the best way to protect your family was to protect everyone's family. In a few days, he would travel to Austin to help another family facing systemic corruption and abuse. He would use every skill learned in 2 decades of military service and offshore survival. He would work outside official channels when necessary, within them when possible, and always with the knowledge that predators only stopped when someone forced them to stop. Sylvia scored a goal and looked toward the porch, waving at her father with the unconscious confidence of a child who knew she was protected. Drew waved back, understanding finally what his life had been preparing him for. Not all warriors fought on foreign battlefields. Some fought in courtrooms and small-town streets, using intelligence instead of weapons, exposure instead of explosions. But the mission was the same: protect the innocent, punish the guilty, and make the world safer for children like Sylvia to grow up in. Drew Campbell had found his war, and he was winning it one family at a time.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.